the hallway with the football coaches. I'm honored by your presence in a whole new way. I thought that would be like an entertaining line. I did not know in a conversation yesterday, our schedule this year is a bit different, a bit more compact. So we've typically concluded our spring meetings on Friday afternoon, and we wrap up Thursday afternoon. Really good timing because we do have 11 baseball teams, which I said 3 times yesterday, so I've got 2 more times to mention it. We have 11 teams playing this weekend, allows our folks to get back, and those hosting be on campus and those that need to travel to engage in that travel. I also mentioned yesterday we have 7 student athletes with us, just to be specific. That conversation with our student athletes begins with me at a dinner with them last evening. And just to let you know, Henry Coleman III from Texas A&M in men's basketball. Henry's been here multiple times with us as a representative, as chair of our men's basketball leadership council. Tamari Key, she's also a veteran of these meetings. Tamari's chaired our women's basketball leadership council for the last few years. Barry Evans from Alabama in men's track and field. Tallulah Miller, who plays soccer on the women's team at the University of Kentucky. Kennedy Todd Williams from Ole Miss in women's basketball, and Derek Wingo, Florida football team member. I missed Derek because he was on one of those flights that got in like late after delays last evening. But I appreciate their leadership. They are selected by their peers. So their Student Athlete Advisory Committee representatives, Barry and Tallulah. And then we have leadership councils for our student athletes in football, men's basketball, and women's basketball. The why is in football, men's basketball, women's basketball, what we learned was the advisory council meetings and schedules weren't really conducive. And if we had our meetings around football and basketball schedules, then we lost some of our other sports. So it's been a really good addition. Spent a great deal of time today, first with the athletics directors, talking about what does the future look like, and then moved around between our faculty athletics representatives, our men's basketball coaches, our women's basketball coaches, and our football coaches on those same issues. Not a lot more from me from a standpoint of opening comments. I will just try to make clear the settlement announcement last Thursday, because we repeated this a few times, is the agreement to terms on really a short form term sheet with the plaintiffs' counsel and the NCA and the 5 conferences is not done. And I think I stated that yesterday. There is a process to play out. So it would usually be Nick Saban up here with his hands moving, talking about a process to be followed. I'll be the one talking about process. And so that process plays out over months into, we expect, next year. And part of that work was what focused our conversation today. So with that, happy to try to be as helpful as I can. I say with a smile.
In your conversations, how do you foresee being able to implement player voices at the table when it comes to whatever the future looks like with revenue sharing and, whether it's forming committees on campus levels or conference levels to represent each other to at least get feedback from them?
Well, that's not new. So the first opportunity we'll have for a gathering is in July in Dallas, and that will be the 3 sport-specific councils and our Student Athlete Advisory Council. And that will be both an educational opportunity for them and then an exchange of ideas. And that's been taking place around some of these topics for years.
Greg, in terms of changes that are coming, major changes, do you anticipate them potentially being conference-wide changes or institution by institution deciding policies on any number of issues out there?
Most of the conversation today was focused on what can we do at a conference level, the desire for consistency. That doesn't mean everything will be, so I think the answer is both, but very much a high level of interest in what can we do as a conference as in a really healthy way and obviously in a legally defensible way.
I wanted to follow up on yesterday when you talked
the settlement is not done. There's a lot there. So there are, let's just unpack elements of the question. So there is a Johnson versus the NCAA case. There are NLRB issues. There's the Dartmouth matter. I think there's another filing around the Ivy League that relate to employment. What I said is not mutually exclusive of what's being done. Our student athletes have not asked me, whether it's in campus conversations, individual conversations, campus conversations with groups, or the councils we've talked about, that being an employee is on their mind. What was the rest of the?
How do you pay them? How are they paid?
Well,
If
it's not done, right?
so if they're getting paid, aren't they employees? I guess I'm just confused.
Not necessarily.
Okay.
Yeah, there are people who are paid who are not employees in this world.
Greg, given the potential for revenue sharing, your schools, like a lot of schools in the A5, are looking for untapped revenue sources, which may or may not include the bringing in of sponsorships, whether it be naming rights or whatever, more so than we've seen in college athletics, kind of the commercialization, so to speak. What are you hearing about that within your league?
I'm going to ask you. I'm like, what are you hearing about that?
Well, I mean,
Outside my
I was
league.
asking a question.
Outside my league, what are you hearing about that?
Um,
Awkward moment there.
Yeah. So, in your league, what are you hearing, and what's too much? What's too much commercialization of the stadiums and arenas?
We have in front of the football oversight, football rules committee, commercial logos on football fields. You've seen some of that with facility naming rights. I grew up near Syracuse, New York, so I was accustomed to the Carrier Dome, which is now the JMA Wireless Dome. So this is not new within the college sports enterprise. We've had clear lines, so it hasn't been appearing on the fields or the floors. We've had jersey patches in bowl games. I would anticipate there's going to be a continuing push of those limits, and we're going to have to come to some agreement in this new environment on where those limits exist. Not all of those are immediate issues, but I think every one of those, if you will, opportunities I just described is going to be part of the conversation. That football field issue is happening now.
How much conversation is there going on between you and the other P commissioners?
P blank commissioners?
P blank commissioners.
Yeah, so that's there are still 5, so Teresa's been involved in conversations. The Pac-12 still exists as an entity. We talk on any number of issues on a bi-weekly basis. That accelerates around certain topics. So you go back to the COVID year, we would talk every day, then 3 days a week, and then once a week, and then every other week. We've kind of hit that generally every other week cadence. And then, we'll talk individually. No rhyme or reason, probably issues driven on the individual conversations.
Brett Yormark said a couple weeks ago that he thinks
He was going to do a
Oh,
follow-up
I'm sorry, I didn't hear
conversation.
that. No, I'm sorry.
Do you want to hear what Brett thinks, or do you want to ask the follow-up question?
Just real quickly, it seems like everyone's looking to you in the Big Ten for guidance on just about everything related to the future of college athletics. Is that, can you tell us how you're viewing it?
Yeah. I'm honored by the way you phrased the question, but I am not the sole source of answers, nor should I be. There are times when I think I have a correct perspective that I'm clear in sharing, but I think this becomes a we issue, and I've thought that before. And in March, and people have opined about the perspective on college football playoff outcomes. I was very direct. I said to my presidents, I was very direct. You expect me to be a statesman. There's times you have to be forceful, and I think you have to find a balance in these leadership positions between both. I read a lot of books about people who've served in leadership. I read books about leadership, and nobody's really defined what those boundary lines are. I do think we're candid as a group with each other. It doesn't mean we always agree, nor doesn't mean we should agree. Obviously, we announced an advisory group being formed with the Big Ten. I thought that was an important opportunity, especially coming out of a set of national meetings. So a college football playoff meeting in early January, we just couldn't move. An NCAA council meeting where I left a room of 80 people with the thought that I've communicated, you don't solve really big problems in big rooms filled with people. You have to narrow that conversation. Now that doesn't mean it's exclusive, and even at the time of that announcement was clear to say we have to bring people into that dialogue. And I think what Brett said, just to follow on Brandon, is he thinks there's been healthy dialogue. I think the relationships have been strong. That doesn't mean I have a call from one of my colleagues saying, well, why did you do this or why did you say that? And I probably make fewer of those phone calls, but I think that's okay. I think that's the way this kind of big college athletics issue that involves 32 Division I conferences, and whether there's 5 in the autonomy or 4 and 10 FBS or 9 FBS, that's the way it works. That's our reality.
Why is it?
Did I answer that question? I mean, there's a lot there.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, why is it you think, Brett's saying he believes that the relationships are as strong as he's seen it, despite you guys, wrangling over money, CFP and all that stuff. Why do you think you guys are so much more transparent now than, say, a year or 2 ago?
Well, I mean, you go back to 21, so we've got pinwheels all around with 16 pennants embedded, right? So you go back to 21. That the decision to grow to 16 caused a bit of a stir, a bit of a fracture. A little bit difficult to get some phone calls returned then. You go to 22, and then all of a sudden I got a lot of phone calls because I was not the one involved in expansion. That creates a disruption. Brett came in 22, and so he's new to it. There's an immediate change in the Pac-12 situation with USC and UCLA moving. We had moved. That creates some tension. We still work together and talk. Then we were at a stopping point in 22 with the CFP where you just really had difficulty securing answers as to why. Like, go around the room and say, okay, I understand you have issues. You should. How do we come to answers that can be most helpful? And that was a really difficult task that stopped from 21 to late 22. And then after the Big Ten expansion, things changed pretty rapidly. And so we've been able to put some things behind us. Some of that done really well, some of it imperfectly. I think that's the result of a human endeavor.
What's the expansion
I'll come back.
What's the appetite for further expansion since we're on the topic?
That pinwheel's getting really tight. I mean, it's like we're on 8-point font, even on the big logo. So I'm 59 now. I don't know if I can go to 6-point font. I'm aware of what's happening around us. I think that we're in a really, really great position as a league. From my perspective, we started with Joe and Chris participating in athletics directors meeting first by video conference in August of 21, just because of the relationships and proximity and the leadership positions they've both held, a lot of familiarity. The president started in our meeting room last year at this meeting, both Joe and Jay, and have continued actively as we've gone through discussions around even settlement, what's the future look like. They officially have a vote July 1st. So that really has been the focus. And we respect that there are agreements and situations that prevent a lot of movement. And so our focus has been on our 16, mine has been. But I pay attention. You will recall that last June, At a forum in D.C., I shared that here I wrote a memo to the presidents that said I'd like everybody to stay where they are. I could rewrite that memo. It didn't work very well based on the happenings in late July, early August. But we'd be fine if everyone stayed in their current alignment.
How would you compare, and I know you weren't the boss of the conference, and how would you compare these two editions with the two previous rounds of SEC expansion?
Well, I was not here for Arkansas and South Carolina. One of the delights of my role is to sit and talk with Roy Kramer as much as possible and hear him tell the story. Mark Womack was part of it. We have pictures of those moments in the early 90s in our library. I was here in 2011. I remember a conversation on the Friday after our media days where Mike Slive had received a phone call from Bowen Lofton about that evening about potential interest, and he asked me my perspective, and I shared that with him. It took a few weeks. I think it was mid-September, and then in November. So those were so quick. This is different in that we've had 3 years of time. I think all three helped continually elevate this league, and I would suggest they build upon each other. And we've got a responsibility across our membership and as an office to lead really in an effective way. And if you give me a moment, at my introductory press conference, I was prepared for the expansion question. So this is March of 2015. And I had intended, when I'm asked about my role, is I'm not focused on expansion. What I'm focused on is on leading with excellence and making sure we function with excellence, because excellence is attractive. And as I'm giving the answer to the New York Times reporter, I realize if I give that answer, they're going to write, oh, he's trying to expand. And so I said, excellence is good. Like, who says that? So yesterday, somebody asked me how I've changed as a leader. I mean, who says excellence is good? And the next morning, I was having breakfast with my family, a celebratory mode, and the whole morning in Puckett's restaurant in Nashville rolled Greg Sankey, excellence is good. So hopefully I've moved beyond that. We want to do things well so that people hold us with the kind of esteem and respect. And I think each of those expansions dating back to the early 90s has helped us build to that level. Yes, sir.
So speaking of, Texas currently has 15 conference championships as they're starting to exit the Big 12. That's more than any other school out there. Could their end have been any better for you as they start to segue and coming into the SEC? And does that even make you feel even more better about having them in?
Well, we had championships at A&M and Missouri as they were departing. I actually don't pay nearly as much attention as you think to that. I think the overall reflection, going back to the decisions with Arkansas, South Carolina, Texas A&M, Missouri, Texas, and Oklahoma are all complementary. They all brought strength. And I don't evaluate one over the other. But I know that there's, as we talked with our student athletes at dinner, a lot of excitement about adding new opponents and being in new places. That's more of how I focus on these opportunities.
June 30th, July 1st, a lot of change going on within this industry, but you're going to spend it in Austin with Texas as they move into the SEC. What went into
And Norman.
You're doing both.
Oh, yeah.
Well, where are you going first?
We'll see. If you don't know that, I'm not going to make the announcement.
With that in mind, being on location for that day, why be on location?
Oh, I can remember traveling to College Station, and Mark was there, and the statue of John David Crow, and Mark talking about his relationships with the family, walking into the celebration, seeing Gary Blair. Vic Schaefer was on his staff, I think, at that time. It was Gary I know I talked to. Some other friends, Rob Childress was coaching baseball. I knew Rob when he was an assistant for Dave Van Hort at Northwestern State. That was a really cool moment. I remember Mike Slive up on the stage with the leadership from Texas A&M. That's what we do at these moments. We honor these moments. And we didn't have that opportunity at the time of announcement because one of the things that both myself, Jay, and Joe said is we want to be respectful and orderly in our transition. And so you did not see SEC flags parading on fields, logos popping up at that time. We knew there'd be a time for that, and that will be upon entry June 30, July 1st. I can recall getting off the plane and the welcoming party in Columbia, Missouri in November. That's what we do, and it's a moment to celebrate. And then we're all going to get focused on how do we win games against each other.
2 years ago at SEC Media Days, you talked about kind of the effort to maybe get the entire SEC footprint together on NIL laws, the different state legislatures. I know there's a lot of moving parts now, and NIL might look different in a couple of years, but with the settlement and kind of the way things are going, have you sensed any appetite, any different appetite that maybe some of those laws could kind of fall together into one?
I've never lost sight of that objective, and even stating it 2 years ago, and I think I noted that I know all of you track what I say and it comes back at me, so congratulations for the gold star there. No, I think that idea remains, that objective remains, if we could have consistency. And is there an opportunity created? I addressed this a bit yesterday at the federal level. If settlement does go through and you have a set of terms that could advance some of these ideas legislatively in a common way at the state level, we should be talking about that. We should be thinking about that strategically, but also at the congressional level.
Did you brief the coaches on roster limits today?
We had a conversation in the football coaches.
How, what was the back and forth like?
Pretty thoughtful, I thought. You know, it's they knew about the preceding conversation 3 or 4 weeks ago, and my recommendation to them is they think about the why. Let's think about the why first, and that usually guides you to the what. And I stayed longer than I anticipated. They may still be meeting and talking about the why and the what. I think we had Alan Sills from the NFL in there, so that was the nature of the conversation.
With the NFL, with Alan Sills, the NFL talking about?
Not roster limits, just talking about their research, what they do from a health and safety standpoint. Alan was worked with us on a committee almost 15 years ago, and has been somebody, Mississippi State undergrad, Vanderbilt Medical Center, that we stayed in constant contact with, and then he ended up as the NFL chief medical officer. So he's made, I don't know that it's an annual habit, but a regular priority to visit with our head coaches, which we appreciate.
Do you know if this is going to be, if roster limits are going to be conference by conference or NCAA-wide?
It's not done.
Greg, were there conversations today about availability reports, and how receptive are coaches to that, you think?
I have noted that in my coaches' visits. I did not engage in conversation. I did acknowledge it's a cultural change for us, but things are changing around us. And as I said yesterday, this is intended to be the beginning of a discussion, not a decision point. So that's how I framed it.
So Greg, I know obviously you have conversations about roster limits, and I know there's only so much you can get into because the settlement isn't done. But when you start prioritizing, you can't wait until it's done to have these conversations. Can you give us some idea of what conversations you can have and where the priorities line as far as like we need to get in front of this because it's coming?
Yeah, that's what I said.
But can you be a little more specific about like
I was trying to, I'm not trying to be entertaining, although it happens accidentally from time to time, but saying here's the reality, and my encouragement was that we think about the why, and our foot.
I guess what are some of the other things? Like there is roster limits, and you talked about that with the ADs and some other members of the group. When you start talking about what are the things we need to tackle with this coming settlement beyond just roster limits.
Yeah. So yeah, there are a variety of issues, and I said yesterday I had just finished reading the term sheet that talks about confidentiality at the bottom. So you can read that and imagine, you know, we got 22% revenue share. What does that mean for our programs? How is that distributed? What are the big picture implications? What does that mean from a state legislation standpoint? How are we going to approach the federal government? None of those are term sheet specific issues, but those are environmental issues that properly deserve attention.
When it comes to the or would it be a scenario where an SEC team released an availability report, but a non-conference team did not going into a contest?
Yeah, noting it's the beginning of a discussion, that discussion is framed around conference games because we don't control the information that a non-conference opponent has. I think the non-conference opponent has the same issues that we're describing to our coaches in play, which is the importance of information in this sports gambling context, the widespread level of contact that exists between college athletes and in the public on a campus, the number of people in an athletic department, all of that in comparative to professional teams that have limited access for the players, limited staff by comparison. And so we've kind of framed that conversation in that way as part of our why.
Greg, is it purely wait and see in terms of budgetary impact of what the settlements are going to be, or can schools begin or conferences begin planning ways to save money to allocate to compensating players?
I would say that the wheels are turning. From the moment this became more real, and it's not just reductions, it's what opportunities might be there. I mean, Ross asked me about how do people think from a future standpoint, and we're not going to inventory those, but I'm confident the wheels are turning.
Greg, I'll apologize because I wasn't here yesterday if somebody asked you this.
It was much more entertaining
I always miss the
and informative.
I was reading up on Twitter.
Me too.
The
Don't read the comments after I say something.
Ross talked about commercializing things. There's been a lot of talk about private equity, private capital, schools being pitched on that. What are your just general thoughts on that as a route to better fund your athletic departments?
In my experience, those involved in private equity want to be paid back, so I would caution people around the notion of short-term fixes. I saw Trev's comment. I don't know that everybody shares that perspective on resources. I understand, I think, why private equity is interested in college sports, which for those of you who were with me at the college football playoff meetings when I walked out, there were 4. I said, you know what, if I was on the outside looking in at all the good that's happening around college sports, I'd want to be a part of that action as well. I take that interest as a compliment. When you look at what's happened with women's sports, particularly women's basketball for us, the crowds that we had at our baseball tournament, the crowds during the regular season, yeah, that's interesting. And as I understand the private equity world, there's a lot of capital that's been built up that, well, what are the new ways to release it? You see the NFL in that conversation. I would observe, as I understand professional leagues, they'll have policies as a league about how that private capital is deployed. And I think that's a cautionary note that suggests people should consider carefully whether they move into it. I've been interested in some of these, these league ideas that are generated out of Manhattan, as I see it. Never mention academics in their pitch deck. It's fascinating to me. Never once say anything about a young person's education. Not a lot of evaluation about who benefits from this participation, about the level of control that's ceded by public universities to private equity. As you know, Dan Wolkin and I probably don't see eye to eye on a lot of things. I read his Red Lobster commentary and realized I have to figure out what to get my in-laws for Christmas other than a Red Lobster gift card, because that's been a hit. But there are cautionary tales about private equity out there. And I've had half dozen or more meetings with representatives, all good people, all learning opportunities. But I think people have to exercise a level of care before just jumping in. And to a certain extent, we need to keep in mind that the pitches made for some of these leagues don't do anything to solve the antitrust issues and actually introduce new antitrust issues. And so we have a responsibility to try to work through this settlement that's not done and provide a framework for the future, and we're very much focused on that endeavor. Now, will other ideas come? Certainly. So, yeah, so unlike professional leagues with franchises, we have public universities that actually have opportunities for financing that may be much less expensive, and limits on how debt might be secured, under those state laws. So it's not just a parallel.
What is
Did I answer that?
Perfectly.
Yeah, could a league blank, could a league explore, but that doesn't mean yes.
what has Trev Alberts brought to the conference so far in some of the discussions today?
Well, first he invited me. I was in College Station for dinner, and there's a restaurant right at the airport that we ate at. I'd flown in. I'd seen that airport. Someone will have to tell me the name. Gate 12, and had a great dinner and a great visit. He and I had met a couple of times before he stepped into the role at Texas A&M. He brings a perspective that's really interesting, having been a player at Nebraska, played in the NFL, worked in the media. Then the Nebraska-Omaha conversation. I knew that he was there. He had hired an individual with whom I worked when he was on the NCAA staff, and I just asked about him, and we walked through kind of the workflow he experienced there, the dynamics of being at Nebraska-Omaha, and then his time at the University of Nebraska in Lincoln. And then, hey, what made this attractive? And I appreciate, we have a couple of coaches here listening to me for the second time today, the respect for people who want to take on this challenge, who move from one place to another and say, I want to be a part of that. And I think he's brought some insight from his football background. He's brought some insight from his media background. We're always going to be careful, but he'll share some of the thinking when he was in conversations with the Big Ten. He's going to do that respectfully, so it's not like we're sharing top secret information. And I think he's been a really helpful resource already.
One more question, please.
Oh, I was just getting warmed up.
Question, full-side reception. I want to go to the full-side reception.
Oh, that's I'm just going to talk there or here. All that matters is there's shrimp available. That's really what matters. Oops.
I'd rather talk to you with shrimp available.
Okay, that's your decision to make. I heard him shutting the whole thing down, and now the pressure's on. Who wants to ask the?
Is it your sense that the roster limits for football are coming, and it's just a matter of trying to? I mean, the coaches obviously want it to be above 85, but is it your sense that those roster limits are coming?
I began yesterday with my citation from my 2015 Media Days speech. Times they are changing. Times they are changing.
I believe Lane Kiffin is outside the room. Anybody wants to stay for him? Thank you.
Are you staying for him?
Probably not.